Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Lift for Peace, End the Travel Ban to North Korea. My name is Ayoung Che. I'm on the board of Women Cross DMZ and with the Korea Peace Now campaign, and I am delighted to be your MC this evening. Let's start with some housekeeping tips, which will be shown on the slide, on the screen. It's very basic. Please, for those of you who want interpretation, go to the bottom of your screen and choose the language you want to hear and click mute for the original audio. If you want English, then click mute on the Korean and vice versa. The next screen. So there are some basic participation guidelines we'd like to share with you. Your questions should be sent to the Q&A box and use the chat box just to share comments. And depending on the number of questions we get tonight, we may not be able to answer everyone, but we will try. This session is being recorded and it will be archived online. And just try to refrain from offensive comments because anyone who does not observe this rule will be removed from the session and will not be allowed to return. During the next 90 minutes, we're going to have a very full program with excellent speakers, time for Q&A, and tips on how you can get involved. Tonight's webinar, LIFT, is Let Individuals Travel Freely. This is a joint initiative of three Korea Peace organizations, the Korea Peace Partnership, consisting of the Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network, the Korea Peace Network, and Korea Peace Now. Endorsing organizations are the American Friends Committee and Divided Families USA. The American Friends Committee is a Quaker organization that promotes a world free of violence, inequality, and oppression. Divided Families USA is a national organization of young volunteers whose mission is to facilitate closure for those elderly Korean Americans who have been separated from their loved ones because in North Korea due to the Korean War. We are calling on the U.S. State Department to lift the travel ban to North Korea. This ban was imposed by the Trump administration in 2017. Before that, U.S. citizens could travel freely in and out of Korea. For years, this allowed Korean Americans to unite with family members separated during the Korean War, and U.S. citizens to engage in humanitarian work, cultural, social, and educational programs, business partnerships, and much, much more. Before the ban, the initiative and creativity of Americans going to North Korea for people-to-people engagement gave rise to genuine hopes for peace. Since the State Department banned travel to North Korea 4 years ago, there have been very few limited exceptions. So essentially, the ban has put a full stop to the invaluable contact and human exchanges that are so key to establishing normal relationships and building trust. Only with goodwill and diplomacy can we bring an end to the unresolved 70-year Korean War. From tonight's panelists, we will gain a clear understanding of the harmful and negative effects of the travel ban and why we believe that lifting it would be in the best interests of the United States, both Koreas, and the world at large. I am just noticing that there are over almost 120 and going attendees tonight. And we'd love to know where you're calling in from. So would you please put that in the chat box? That would be so exciting. And right now, I have the pleasure of announcing we started the program with a beautiful poem, an original poem written by our colleague Gary Pack. It's called Crossings, and he wrote it especially for us this evening. Gary is Professor Emeritus of English and a member of the Center for Korean Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He has authored 5 works of fiction, produced a documentary film called Huli about the activist movement in Hawaii, and is a very popular jazz pianist. Here's Gary.
Hi all. Thank you, Young, for that introduction. I wrote this poem again, especially for this webinar on the banning the North Korean travel. And I begin with an epigraph by the poet Yoon Dong-ju. The title of this poem is called Crossings. I live only so I can search for what I have lost. We have gone on this road before, many times. There are no blades of grass, not a bird to be heard or seen, not a star uncovered from the bleakness of midnight's cold. A wall runs alongside, its ragged top too high to look over, reminding us of stories of love, damaged by wind, sun, and snow. The road does not end, but goes on, as straight as an artist's line. Sometimes in the day, we come across a steel gate, its long shadows spilling into our path. When we dare to look through its bars, white light blinds our eyes. Looking above, we see empty, blue sky. We saw a turtle once cross our path, but startled, it scuttered under the gate. Why do we continue to thread down this road? Our souls have long worn thin, yet we trudge on, and we spin lamentations and excuses as if it is the only thing we can do in our lives. Why do we live to look for what we have lost? What have we lost? Is it the singing of our grandmothers? Is it the bravery of the tiger roaming the mountains? Do we remember how to fly a kite on icy winds of a new spring? We follow the long shadows of the wall, tread on this road with no blades of grass, with no birds in sight, and no stars to guide our way. But ever so often, when the sun is high and sure, when shadows have shrunk, we look above and breathe in and out and smile at the blank blue sky. Thank you.
Wow, what a thought-provoking and very moving poem, Gary. Thanks so much. Thank you for this gift. And now we will hear from Representative Jan Schakowsky, a member of Congress from Illinois. Unfortunately, she was not able to join us, but there is a recorded message that we will be seeing and hearing in a second. Representing the Chicago's North Side and its northern suburbs, Representative Schakowsky is now in her 12th term. She is an outspoken leader on women's issues and led the passage of the Women's Peace and Security Act in 2017. She She's also been a consistent supporter of peace on the Korean Peninsula, and in the last congressional session was an original co-sponsor of House Resolution 152, calling for a formal end to the Korean War. She and Congresswoman Barbara Lee met with a delegation of women members of South Korea's National Assembly to discuss women's cooperation and leadership for peace on the Korean Peninsula. And earlier this year, Representative Schakowsky, along with Representatives Marilyn Strickland and Ro Khanna and 9 other representatives, sent a letter to President Biden urging a secure and sustainable path forward for U.S.-North Korea relations that would be based on a peace-first approach on the Korean Peninsula. Let's see the slide from Representative Schakowsky.
One of the most heartbreaking aspects and costs of the unresolved Korean War is the separation of families. It's estimated that there may be 10 million people who are separated from their families, and the oldest of the generations is 80 and beyond. Many of them have lost family who have died, and during this period. I guess one of the only bright spots is that Korean Americans, for a long time, have been able to go to North Korea. So at least some family has been able to be reunited until the Trump administration in 2017 stopped that. And I am calling right now on President Biden to reinstate the ability of Americans to be able to fly to North Korea. That would be a big help. This ban also interrupted even life-saving aid missions that went there, and interrupted the ability of people who were wanting to bring back the remains of soldiers who 70 years ago were killed in the Korean War. So all of that stopped. Before 2017, Americans were able to go to North Korea, not only to see family, but there could be medical missions, person-to-person contact, all kinds of things that are really productive, I think, in terms of diplomacy and just that person-to-person relationships that mean so much to people. But that all ended when Donald Trump said no U.S. passport can be used to go to North Korea. And it's time for us to set it straight. Although concerns that remain about the COVID-19 pandemic have actually stopped the travel right now to Korea, it's a good time to start the policies, putting them in place in order to allow that travel to happen. It also is a kind of confidence building that shows that the United States doesn't have any gripe with the people of North Korea. And that's really important too. As someone who is for peace and reconciliation, I am conveying to the President of the United States that this is an opportunity. And he is a person that wants to see families united one with the other. And so I hope that he'll take this opportunity to make the changes that we need to restart that travel from the United States to North Korea.
Thank you so much, Representative Schakowsky. You are a true Korea peace champion. Thank you so much. Now I'm pleased to introduce our panel moderator. Professor Ya is the founder of the Asian American Studies program at Northwestern University, where she teaches Asian American and Asian history. Professor Chi Yun Ya has written a book, Beyond the Shadow of Camptown, Korean Military Brides in America, which was the first substantive work to examine the consequences of the migration of US militarism in Korea. A longtime advocate for Korea peace and unification, she currently serves on the boards of Women Cross DMZ and the Korea Policy Institute. Take it away, Ji-yeon.
Thank you so much, Ayoung. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. Today's panel gets to the heart of our campaign, Lift for Peace. It will help us all better understand why the current ban on North Korea travel should be lifted. We present tonight 3 distinguished panelists who together have more than 4 decades of experience in North Korea. Chun Lim will share his history as a separated family member. Joy Yoon will discuss the impact of the travel ban on humanitarian aid, and Key Park will tell us how the travel ban has affected medical missions and medical education. After the presentations, our panelists will take your questions, so please post your questions in the Q&A box. Our first speaker is Chun Lim, a retired engineer and a longtime advocate for separated family members. He is a member of the Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network, the National Committee for North Korea, the Korean American National Coordinating Council, and also the National Unification Advisory Committee. Chun, we are so glad to have you here today.
Thank you. It is good to see you all. First of all, I thank organizers of this campaign for giving me the opportunities to share my story. I also thank House Representative Jen Schakowsky, who supports this campaign. She is my proud representative, District 9 in Illinois. On Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, millions of people travel to their hometown to be with their families. There are those who cannot go to their hometowns or see their families. Refugees and separated families are some of the unfortunate ones who fall in this category. It has been estimated that about 100,000 separated families of the Korean War live in the United States. Many of them are no longer with us. Most of the remaining separated families are in their 80s or 90s and have not yet met their families in North Korea. I myself was born in Nampo, a city that is about 40 miles west of Pyongyang, the capital city. When the Korean War broke out, my hometown was heavily bombarded by US bombers. My father decided to send my mother, brother, and me to my grandfather's home for safety. I was 6 years old. We became a separated family when the border at the 38th parallel closed. It was a hard life living in South Korea without my father. My mother became the sole breadwinner. However, we struggled but survived. I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree. After serving in the South Korean Army as an officer at the DMZ, I came to the United States in 1972 and got a job at Sergeant Lundy. The firm provides engineering services for fossil and nuclear power plants. In 1998, at the age of 52, I had a great fortune to go to North Korea and visit my hometown. Sergeant Lundy was chosen for the engineering consulting work on the Korean Peninsula Energy Development Organization project, which provides 2 nuclear power plants to North Korea. The project was under the agreed framework signed by the US and North Korea in 1994. I was appointed as the project manager on that project. Through contacts with the North Korean delegations on the project and North Korean UN Mission Office, I became one of the lucky ones to find my family. I went to North Korea with high hopes to see my dad, but I came 6 years too late. My youngest half sister in Pyongyang came to the hotel to meet me. She handed me an envelope and told me what my father's dying wish was. Find them when Korea became one again. I opened the envelope and found 2 photos and a note. One was of my parents on their wedding day. The second one was my mother's middle school field trip to Pyongyang. The note had my name and my brother's name with birthdays written on it. A few days later, I was able to visit where my father's ashes were kept and paid my respect. At this moment, millions things went through my mind. I collapsed and cried out, why? It was not just at him. It was much more than that. It was a huge burst of what I kept inside for 46 years. It not only encompassed my emotions for the loss of my father, it accentuated my life experience I have had living as a separate family in divided country. My visit to my hometown allowed me to see my uncle, the youngest sibling in my father's family. At 52 years of age, I still remembered the piggyback rides he gave me as a child. It was such a memorable moment to be able to meet my uncle and aunt, brothers and sisters, cousins, nieces, and nephews. During the time I visited, North Korea experienced droughts and floods for 3 consecutive years. I could feel the struggles my family was facing with the shortage of food and electric power. It was a bittersweet experience, but one that I will always remember. I have been fortunate enough to go visit my hometown in North Korea 7 more times. This did not include the trips to North Korea for the Kettle Project. For those trips, I was not able to visit my family. The trip in 2014 was with my wife, who was born in Seoul and never visited the North. We planned a trip to see her family in the South Korea and mine in the North Korea over the Korean Thanksgiving holiday. After having a joyful time with family in Seoul, we went to North Korea. When I submitted approval for our trip to North Korea through the North Korean UN Mission Office in New York, I requested the plan to include a trip with my family. I thought this trip would be a good opportunity for my wife to get to know my family. If approved, we were very excited to find out that the trip with the family was approved as we arrived in Pyongyang. We rented a minivan for the trip and off we went to Mount Myohyang. It was one of the best trips I had. Although it was a very short trip, my wife was able to spend some quality time with my family in North Korea. Our 2 week stay in North Korea gave many opportunities to see life in North Korea, casual meetings with the family at hotel and local restaurants, visiting local markets, family picnics, ping pong games with a brother, a walk along the Daedong River bank, and Sunday services at Bongsu and Chilgok Church. My brother and sister arranged a picnic at Moranbom Park in Pyongyang. We ate, drank, and sang together, 나의 살던 고향 and 홀로 아리랑. My aunt and cousin also arranged a picnic when we visited Nampo, my hometown. Cousins told me that my aunt insists to prepare special treats for us, roasting seashells in open fire, fresh sashimi, and king crabs. Also, we went to Mount Kumgang, Masingyang, a newly developed ski resort in North Korea. Another trip was to Panmunjom, where we could see the south side of the joint security area from the north. We were surprised to see many tourists from Europe and China at Panmunjom. On our way back to Chicago, I asked my wife about this trip to the south and to the north. She said, it's a place where people are living under different systems, just like any other place on earth. I felt that I had a very joyful time with my family. At the same time, my heart was saddened because there are so many separated families that cannot experience the joy of meeting their families in North Korea. In 2017, I had planned to visit my family in North Korea. President Trump imposed a ban that prevents all US citizens from traveling to North Korea. Again, I have been cut off from my family. My last trip to see my family was 2014, 7 years ago. Time to time, I opened the family photo album dated 2014. I see the 1-year-old baby in my arms and realize that she is now an 8-year-old girl who is 1 year younger than my grandchild, whom I am fortunate enough to see frequently. I also wonder if my aunt and cousin with a lung cancer in this photo are still alive. I am now 75 years old. I do not know how many more years I have left. I wish to see them again sooner than later. I believe as a human being, we long to be home. Home is many things, but for me, home includes wanting to return to my hometown where memories of a family life can be revived. Going to the place where memories were experienced and meeting families give me peace. For too long, separated families of the Korean War have not gone home. The Korean Peninsula is still divided, and the war has not yet ended, still under the armistice since 1953. Please lift the ban. Allow these separate families to have a closure and be given the opportunity to go home. There is a truly short time left for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yoon, for sharing your experiences. I was tearing up listening to you, and I'm sure I wasn't alone. Our next speaker is Joy Yoon. She is the co-founder of Ignis Community, a nonprofit organization that specializes in treating children with developmental disabilities in North Korea. She is one of the few Americans who has spent more than 10 years living and working in the DPRK, and she is the author of the book, Discovering Joy, 10 Years in North Korea. She joins us today from Seoul, where it is bright and early in the morning. Joy, We are so excited to hear from you today.
Thank you, Jian, and thank you so much to Korea Peace Now, who is hosting this very important webinar. Thank you for all of you who are attending, especially congressional staff members. As said, my name is Joy Yoon, and I am one of the few Americans who has lived for an extensive period in North Korea. For over 13 years, my husband and I have been working in North Korea through our nonprofit Ignis community. Since my husband is Korean American, our humanitarian organization was initially invited through the Association for Overseas Compatriots. Americans, particularly Korean Americans, have been traveling to North Korea since the 1980s. According to the Korean American National Coordinating Council, who processes visas to North Korea, approximately 6,000 Korean Americans and their families have traveled to North Korea between 2000 and 2017. And since 1995, humanitarian organizations from a variety of countries have been working in both the capital city of Pyongyang and in the Northeast region known as Rasan. Unfortunately, when the US geographic travel restriction was implemented in September 2017, our entire family and approximately 200 other US citizens had to leave North Korea. Ignis Community's humanitarian assistance to North Korea has included food and medical donations, shoe donations to orphanages and remote child care facilities, and medical training through our Pyongyang Spine Rehabilitation Center. One of Ignis's primary focuses is to help get medical treatment for children with developmental disabilities, a demographic with few resources in North Korea. Take, for example, Blessing. Blessing came to us when we were working in the Northeast region of Rasan. She's just one real child out of thousands that we have had the opportunity to help in North Korea. Blessing has quadriplegic cerebral palsy, and like most disabled children in North Korea, Blessing was kept secretly at home. Even the family's closest friends and coworkers did not even know that Blessing existed. At the age of 4, she could not chew her food or voluntarily move her muscles. Blessing's grandmother literally kept her alive by chewing her food for her and then spooning it into her mouth and helping her swallow. It took Blessing and her family several days to travel from their home province to the capital city of Pyongyang, where Ignis is developing the Spine Rehabilitation Center. As the first training hospital for pediatric rehabilitation, this center will provide medical and therapeutic services for children with cerebral palsy, autism, and other developmental disabilities. Here, Blessing was able to learn how to voluntarily operate her mouth muscles, roll over, and even sit up for the first time. Blessing helped catalyze treatment for thousands of children like her throughout the country. Prior to our program, no official treatment existed for children like Blessing. But now doctors are being trained in treatment methodologies at the Pyongyang Medical School Hospital, and we are currently treating a limited number of patients in one small room at the hospital. A rehabilitation center is being developed that has the potential of treating 450 outpatients and 30 inpatients every single day. The North Korea Ministry of Public Health is also working with us to establish pediatric rehabilitation centers in all 10 of the country's pediatric provincial hospitals. Ignis has already been able to provide pediatric rehabilitation to 3 of these provincial hospitals in the city of Pyeongseong, Nampo, and Wonsan. Unfortunately for Blessing, it was not a happy ending. Due to the limited number of patients we can treat until the rehabilitation center is complete, Blessing returned to her home province to wait for her next round of treatment. When we visited her region to invite her back, her father met us and explained, "I'm sorry, Blessing is no longer with us. She has passed on." Although having a developmental disability is typically not a life-threatening condition in a developed nation, in developing nations like North Korea, where life is even difficult for able-bodied people, the fact is that children with disabilities often do not survive. With the increase in sanctions imposed on North Korea, Ignis's success is at risk, and children like Blessing are having a harder time getting access to the treatment they so desperately need. Although it is possible to get an exemption for humanitarian-related items, the process can be subject to burdensome delays. Even American humanitarian workers themselves have been denied at times special validation passports to travel to and enter the DPRK. The United Nations and the United States both state that they have no intention of hurting the common people of North Korea or hindering humanitarian assistance. However, the reality of providing humanitarian aid to North Korea is quite the opposite. It takes years to navigate and request all the necessary governmental permits and licenses, which include not only special validation passports and UN exemptions, but also US Treasury and Commerce licenses. For Ignis community, once the appropriate licenses were obtained, it was the special validation passport applications that most hindered our work. Over the past 3 years, Ignis community was able to obtain these passports 6 times. However, 2 of our applications were completely denied, and our most recent application took over 4 months to process. As a humanitarian organization working on the ground in North Korea, this significantly delays life-saving aid and treatment. The State Department states that they are working on multiple entry special validation passports, which would be a significant improvement. But even so, the application process itself continues to restrict and delay much needed humanitarian assistance. The truth is that Ignis community was only given access to every province in North Korea because we were literally living on the ground, working day in and day out with our North Korean counterparts. We would have never met Blessing, let alone been able to develop the Pyongyang Spine Rehabilitation Center otherwise. Our story is not unique. Americans who have experience working and living in North Korea can testify that our presence in the country makes a tremendous difference. Individuals and groups like ours are restoring individual lives through humanitarian engagement. Not only are we able to impact the lives of common North Korean people, but we are also able to contribute to paving the way towards a peaceful future. From our presence in the country, we have personally experienced how North Korean attitudes about Americans have changed from fear and hatred to openness and warmth. Due to both sanctions and the global pandemic, North Korea is entering yet another major humanitarian crisis. According to the US Department of Agriculture, close to 60% of North Koreans may currently be food insecure. Our most recent news from inside was from our North Korean counterpart just a few weeks ago as we continue to keep in contact with them. He pleaded with us. Words cannot express how difficult life is right now. But the good news is that humanitarian organizations are actively wanting to engage in North Korea. And several nonprofit organizations, such as Ignis Community, have more than a decade of experience working on the ground. Given the freedom to travel, humanitarian organizations like ours can and will save lives. It is time to end the geographic travel restriction to North Korea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy, for sharing your insights. I always learn so much from you, and tonight was no exception. It was eye-opening. To our viewers, please continue posting your questions in the Q&A box. Our next speaker is Ki B. Park. He is a faculty member at Harvard Medical School, where he studies the complex geopolitical factors influencing health in North Korea and the relationships between international security, health, human rights, and health diplomacy. He is the director of the North Korea program at the Korean American Medical Association and has visited the DPRK more than 20 times to support North Korean doctors. His last visit was in November 2019. Ki, we are so glad to see you today.
Thank you, Gian. I don't know about you, but this is emotional for me too. And I was getting misty, both previous speakers. So I want to first thank the organizers for putting this event together, especially people in Washington, Representative Schakowsky, and some of the staffers who are attending today. Please help us. So as Jian mentioned, I'm a medical doctor. I work alongside North Korean doctors in caring for their patients and support their efforts to improve medical care for their people. So my first trip to North Korea was in September of 2007. This was to attend the annual International Medical Conference in Pyongyang, as well as meet my counterparts. As a US citizen, I was required to obtain a visa from North Korean government for entry. At that time, 30 people from South Korea came to this conference, including a KBS crew. Since the beginning of Kim Dae-jung's Sunshine Policy in 2000, South Korean doctors had contributed significantly to the medical system in North Korea. Compared to the South Korean doctors, and this is in 2007, our small group of Korean American doctors really felt tiny. I noticed that some of the visitors from the US were also visiting their families in North Korea on this trip. Now, before I talk about the impact the travel ban has had on our work, I want to explain how the role of Korean American doctors shifted when the conservatives regained control of the South Korean government in 2008. As you may know, one of the first things Lee Myung-bak did when he took office was to shut down exchanges with North Korea. When I returned to Pyongyang the following year to attend the medical conference, there were no South Korean doctors. Their absence really dampened the sense of solidarity that we all remember from the previous year. When I asked the North Koreans why the South Koreans were not attending, they told me that the invitations were sent, but the South Koreans could not come. When I actually went to Seoul right after the Pyongyang trip, I asked my South Korean colleagues why they didn't come, and they said they did not receive the invitation. Who really knows what happened? I actually believe that the South Korean doctors will soon return to Pyongyang. After all, we're talking about doctors, right? Well, 14 years have gone by and still the South Korean doctors are not able to travel to North Korea. The vacuum created by the absence of South Korean doctors was quickly filled by an increasing number of Korean American doctors willing to participate in these Korean American Medical Association trips to North Korea. We did not require permission from the US government to travel to North Korea, and the North Koreans began to trust our group for more and allowed larger and larger numbers, along with more frequent visits. At our peak, we averaged about 30 people per visit. I cannot overemphasize the value of having doctors who speak Korean when working with North Korean doctors. The reason is obvious. For non-Korean speaking doctors, they must work with English-speaking North Korean doctors, a very limited number, or work through interpreters. Neither case is optimal. When I work with North Korean doctors, we speak Korean, and it's so much easier to communicate and teach and take care of patients because we speak the language. Now, I don't have any family in North Korea, but the doctors and the nurses became my friends over the years. We may be citizens of countries that are technically at war, but when we fight to treat disease and injuries together, literally head to head and shoulder to shoulder, performing surgeries together, I'm actually a neurosurgeon, we operate together and we form deep bonds and dearly miss each other and often shed tears when we leave, with the prospect of the next visit to keep us going. Then in 2017, the US government placed a travel ban to North Korea by US passport holders, with very narrow exemptions for humanitarian workers and journalists. The impact of this ban was immediate and dramatic to our work. We were able to apply for the humanitarian exemption, but the process was much too burdensome for most doctors. Our group shrank to 3 to 4. In early 2018, we were actually provided special validation passports to go in. And then we applied again in 2018 for a trip later on that year, and we were denied permission to go. And we later found out that then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was not happy with the results of his meeting in Pyongyang, and upon his return ordered, quote, shut everything down, unquote, including exemptions for humanitarian workers. The members of US NGOs who work in North Korea, the US citizens who work in these NGOs, we all learned that no one was getting special validation passports and demanded a meeting with the then newly appointed US Special Representative for North Korea, Steve Biegun. And to his credit, he actually returned back the policy of allowing special validation passports, and we were able to travel twice in 2019, and last one in November of 2019. But let me be very clear. What the current exemptions process really is a ridiculous and senseless US policy that demands humanitarian workers to seek permission to go help people. I think the travel ban should be lifted for 4 reasons. One, the ban is in place to, quote, protect US citizens from being detained. No one from our group has ever been detained long-term. We have strict policies for respecting the laws of the host country. I will tell you that we actually had 2 doctors who chose to wander out on their own, and they were arrested by the police and brought back to the hotel. As the delegation head, I got in trouble and was reprimanded for not maintaining proper conduct of our group members. Even then, the conversation was lighthearted. They were just saying, like, Dr. Park, Bakibon Sonzeng, you need to, take care of your team members, okay? It's like, yeah, okay, I'll do my best. And that was it. The point is that we have never felt threatened or in danger of detainment as long as we follow the rules. To be fair, the ban does allow humanitarian travel, but the added time and the cost for applying for new passports each time is completely unnecessary and discourages doctors from traveling. Second reason is that I believe the ban is actually a violation of my as a US citizen, my individual civil liberties. I wish to travel to places and I shouldn't have restrictions placed on those places where I want to visit. Number 3, because North Korea actually does not trust the US government because they're adversarial, being seen as a group that actually received permission from the US government can place us at an increased risk, as it raises suspicions that we are either working with or for the US government. And lastly, the ban should be lifted so that family visits can resume. Denying these visits is clearly abhorrent based on moral and humanitarian grounds. Thank you.
Keith, thank you so much for sharing your point of view, especially that list of exactly why the ban should be lifted. It's really enlightening. Before we get the Q&A from the audience, let's hear from Ayoung for just a few moments. Ayoung?
Thank you, Gian. And thank you to June, Joy, and Key for the stories you've told us. I mean, that's so important. Before we get to the Q&A part, which I'm sure everyone is waiting for, I'd like to address the audience about getting involved. If you were moved by what you heard tonight as much as I have been, there are 3 concrete ways you can help. 1, 2, and 3. First, go to our website. It's posted in the chat box, and you'll find a petition there. We're sending it to the State Department to lift the travel ban, and we need your signature there. So please sign the petition. Second, go to our website and sign up to be a campaign supporter, the supporter of Lift the Travel Ban to North Korea, so that you can continue to receive our campaign updates and alerts. Number 3, join this year's Korea Peace Advocacy Week, which is July 12 to 16. During this week, hundreds of Korean Americans and friends will have pre-arranged virtual meetings with their congressional representatives to advocate for legislation that will promote peace in Korea. As part of this action, we will advocate for lifting the travel ban. We've been organizing this advocacy week for the past month or so, and you can still be a part of this exciting action if you register immediately. Unfortunately, the deadline to register is tomorrow, and the link is in the chat box, so please make sure to register immediately after this webinar. Thank you. Please join us in this campaign. It is so urgent. It is so urgent to have the ban lifted. Now back to you, Jian, for the Q&A.
Thank you, Ayoung. What an impact we can make if everyone here tonight follows through on Ayoung's suggestions. And what a great audience. Thank you so much for all your questions, for all of your comments, supportive comments in the chat. Our first question, let's start with this one. This is directed at Dr. Ki Park. And Song Oh asks, if you and the doctors were supported by an organization who would take responsibility for the paperwork and other processes, would that help with getting greater numbers to North Korea to do your humanitarian work?
That is really kind offer, Song, and I think that's, I'm not going to say no, it would definitely help, but let me be clear on what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to ask for help for administrative burdens. We want the policy changed. It's time to lift the travel ban now. It is absurd, and we shouldn't have to make extra paperwork for other people like you even to volunteer to help us, to do the administrative things, which are completely unnecessary.
Thank you for that response, Ki. Joy, would you like to address that a little bit too as well?
Yes, I think Dr. Park made a very good point. Our entire family was living in North Korea because when we're treating patients with developmental disabilities, that's a long process. Dr. Park can go in and do a surgery, a neurosurgery, and leave, but we are the ones who are doing the rehabilitation of individuals, and that takes years, even daily therapy, training doctors as well as treating patients. And so we really need to be on the ground 24/7. And in order for us to do that, our whole family has to be able to be there. And the only way we can do that is if the travel ban is lifted. Currently, the US State Department will not issue any kind of special validation passport for our entire family. And in fact, they don't even issue special validation passports for people on our team, on our humanitarian organization, but who are not medical professionals. So it's very difficult for us to even get our own NGO workers inside if they do not have a medical reason for being there. That is why the ban needs to be lifted.
Thank you, Joy. That really makes it clear exactly why the ban has to be lifted and why workarounds like getting validation passports simply are not the answer. Our next question comes from Kurt Esslinger, who asks, what is an example of a relationship with North Koreans that has made a difference in the life of a US American? For example, leading to the revision of stereotypes of North Koreans or development of a more nuanced understanding of the North Korean situation. Ki, Joy, Chun, I think any of you could answer that, but maybe we'll go to Joy first.
That is such a wonderful question. And I would start with saying it has changed my life. It has changed my understanding and my perspective of North Koreans. And that's really what my whole memoir is about, Discovering Joy, 10 Years in North Korea. So you can read all about that if you like. And I think every individual that we host that visits with our organization into North Korea, they say the same thing. It is nothing what I expected North Korea to be like. And they have had their lives and their worldview transformed because of their experience in North Korea.
Thanks, Joy. Chun, I know that in addition to meeting with your separated family members, you were also in North Korea for working on the Keto project. Can you talk a little bit about how you saw working on that project affect your other American colleagues? Oh, you're muted, Chun. You have to unmute, please.
Yeah, that question, Paul, that was a very, Keto site, I should say, was a special place that North Korea allowed U.S. personnel as well as personnel from South Korea. They do manage, they operate within that compound. So there was a little less contact with the local people, but obviously, time to time, there have been some contacts with North Korean. I'll give you one example. One day, the construction truck of a Keros project killed a goat of North Korean families. And the site manager is so worried, so he ran to the keeper of that goat, apologizing and then asking, what can I do for compensation? And the keeper of the goat says, no, you don't need to do anything, okay? That was an accident. A goat is killed, so we're gonna have a party with the village people. All we have to do is just report it to, authority that what had happened. That was it. And then site manager was startled hearing that. If it was happened in South Korea, it's not going to go that way. So they did see the difference how people live under different systems. So I didn't know what kind of systems the North Koreans were under, but having meetings with a North Korean at the site and then hearing all these kind of stories, I began to understanding this difference in the systems makes difference in how they live.
Thank you so much, Yoon. And would anybody else like to address that question? Okay, let's go on to the next question. And we have an anonymous attendee who asks, what can people attending today do to make sure that the North Korean people get the help they so much need? Ki, would you like to address that question, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to. First of all, North Korea is actually, the main thing they want is an opportunity to take care of themselves. They are not looking for a handout. If you look at their health care system, they actually had surpassed South Koreans in certain metrics prior to the collapse of the Soviet bloc and the famine. What has happened, though, is that the international sanctions, which, by the way, is the most harshest set of restrictions ever placed on any country, it really shackles their ability to do anything. They have a limit on how much petroleum they can import per each year. It's capped right now at 10% of the previous levels, 500,000 barrels of petroleum a year. Australia, which is an oil-producing country, similar population, they import 500,000 barrels of oil a day. In North Korea, they're capped at that amount for an entire year. So what they really need is an opportunity to take care of themselves. So the sanctions had to be rolled back. Of course, they're held because of the perceived threat within the U.S. and the larger community the North Korea weapons program represents. But I think, and this is why I think we should all be pushing for an end of war declaration and a peace treaty. Right? That's the one thing we can do that will, one, remove the threat, and second, sorry, that's my dog, and second, it will help improve the lives of ordinary people in North Korea.
Thank you, Ki. Yes, so true. So we have a question from Christine An, who is the founder and executive director of Women Cross DMZ. And she asks, what has been your experience engaging with the Biden administration in upholding its commitment to engaging North Korea? There are two Korean Americans now, Sung Kim and Chung Pak, leading the State Department Korea does. How can we hold them accountable, especially as Korean Americans in these positions of immense influence? Joy, I wonder if you would like to address that first.
Thank you. That is such an important question. And as a humanitarian organization, it is really difficult for us to be so involved politically because we have to balance politics with 4 different nations. We have to work with South Korea because our nonprofit organization is based here. And then we have to work with the US government, of course, and we have to work with the North Korean government. And then all the humanitarian aid is actually channeled through China. So we also have to work with the Chinese government. And as a result, whenever we're given the opportunity, we do meet with the state, especially the Korea desk at state. But unfortunately, we haven't had much contact with the Biden administration. We have not been able to communicate with the North Korea desk as of yet. I know that they're brand new. They're just getting into their own roles right now. So it's really hard for us to say how this is going to fold out. But our personal experience has been that typically in the State Department, people rotate every few years or even less, sometimes even every year they're rotating. And by the time the individual understands the situation, they move on to a different position. So it is extremely frustrating for humanitarian organizations like ours who have consistently since several years ago, since over the past decade, been working with the State Department. And as new personnel come in every year or every 2 years, we have to start all over again. So we need a consistent policy for North Korea that remains throughout time, that it doesn't change even within the administration, because working with North Korea is going to be a long process. It can't be something that's done quickly. And so we have to have some consistency in the State Department.
Thanks, Joy. Key, what has been your experience?
I'm going to take a liberty of answering a question just popped up on the screen, which I think, if that's okay with you, Jian.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What is something that the panelists wish to say to the U.S. congressional representative staff members that are in attendance today? And I think this is a really good question. And I think others can answer this, but we've analyzed the 20 U.S. citizens that were actually detained in North Korea. There's a total of 20. Of the 20, actually 8 entered into North Korea illegally. They violated the borders, right? I would argue, and then the other 8 were charged with actually not following the rules once they got into the country, breaking the law. All right. If you go to Yemen and you start evangelizing, they'll probably arrest you. But my point is, 8 people out of 20 were actually just decided to, on their own, cross the border without permission. Has the travel ban stopped those people from doing that? Actually not. There was a situation actually during the summitry with Trump where a US citizen decided that he wanted to cross the border without permission and he was captured. What happened? North Koreans called up the State Department and said, hey, take your guy home. We don't want him, right? And that's a direct result of the diplomacy that was happening during that time. When you have these kinds of channels of communication, you don't really have to worry about people getting detained, even if they cross the border illegally, right? So I just want to make sure that the policymakers here really understand the policies that are designed to protect American people really aren't working the way they're supposed to. And I would ask the Congress to keep the administration accountable for these policies. What is the evidence that this is actually protecting US citizens? And what is the evidence? Do you have any idea what kind of unintended consequences you're having with these policies?
Thank you, Key. I'm sure that for some people, especially the staff members who are here, what's going through their minds is, well, but what about Otto Warmbier? What about the tragedy that happened to that young American man? Joy, I wonder if you would like to address that issue.
Yeah, there is no doubt that the situation with Otto Warmbier was a tragedy. Even today, our hearts and sympathies go out to his family and friends. But the fact is that it was more of a tragedy because it was completely preventable. And I think this has to be emphasized. that people who go into North Korea and who are aware of the policies of the laws of the nation and abide by those laws, there is very little, if any, chance that they will be detained. I think it's important to point out when I mentioned that there are 6,000 Korean Americans that went in through the Korean American National Coordinating Council. Not a single one of those 6,000 have been detained. It's also important to note that that's just Korean Americans through that one invitation route. So the actual numbers of Americans traveling to North Korea is probably well over 10,000. Out of that, since 1996 to 2018, there have only been 20 US citizens detained in North Korea. That's less than one person per year. And all of those detained have been released, and most of them have been released in health. Otto Warmbier was the only exception to that. And even though it was an extreme tragedy, I think it's important that we understand the scope of this, that the probability is extremely low, and that actually the benefits of traveling to North Korea, establishing relationships with North Korean people, engaging with the country has made more difference in their attitudes towards America, changes, as well as literally saving people's lives. And the benefits far outweigh the risks. And so we need to keep that in perspective.
Thank you, Joy. Appreciate that perspective very much. We do have another question that is about sort of the nitty-gritty of this kind of thing, which is, although the US should lift the travel ban now to be ready when travel becomes possible, no matter what North Korea does. However, I think the fact that since the COVID pandemic began, North Korea does not allow anyone into the country. This is a question from an anonymous attendee. Either Key or Joy would like to address this.
Yeah, I can take that. No, that's absolutely right. Right now, the North Koreans who are trying to protect their population from this global pandemic has sealed their borders at a steep cost to their economy. It has to do with their national security mindset. We don't know when they're going to reopen. They have applied for the vaccine program through the COVAX. We hope that they open as quickly as possible, but that doesn't, let's make sure that we are talking about two separate issues. The travel ban is an unrelated issue. We want that lifted, period, right? And we want to be able to travel to North Korea when and if when the North Koreans reopen the borders.
Thank you, Key. Excellent point. There's a question in the chat actually that I would like to go to. And this question is, I'm curious about the new clinic that was built in Pyongyang and who is responsible for the day-to-day operation today and the volume of the patients being served. So this must be a question for Joy.
That's an excellent question. We still have our North Korean counterparts. Obviously, this was a joint project working with North Korean doctors, as well as the administrators of the hospital, as well as the Ministry of Public Health and our colleagues in the Association for Overseas Compatriots in North Korea. So we still have local North Koreans in Pyongyang. But unfortunately, because the hospital that you saw there that we're building and we're hoping to open soon, it's not in full capacity yet. We have been able to send in medical shipments for the equipment, but as you can imagine, that equipment is extremely expensive and we don't want anything to go wrong with that equipment. And so we need to go back right now. We need to go back to North Korea and be able to train those doctors on this equipment. We do not want them to, by accident, not only misuse it, but, be able to break the equipment by accident. And so we need that training. It's essential, and we can only do that in person. And so right now they are continuing to treat patients in a small room in the original hospital, but that new center that you saw is still not yet operational. We are waiting to go back to North Korea. And I think I need to add to what Dr. Park also mentioned with the currently the pandemic and the closing of the borders. that we don't have any control over. That's North Korea's decision to close their borders to prevent the spread of COVID in their country. However, I do know for a fact that they are preparing sanitation or sterilization centers. They're actually requesting from different entities help with this to be able to provide these sterilization centers to start bringing goods back into the country. And so they are on a process of slowly trying to reopen their country. But as I shared with you, it could be 40 to 60% of common North Koreans who do not have the food that they need for every day. They're food insecure. And as a result, COVID would have most likely have really, really serious consequences in their country. So you have to, they're weighing the weight of COVID coming in versus the needs of their people. And so they are trying to open up their country, but it'll be a slow process. In addition to that, one of the things that we can do to lift the travel ban, why it's so important, is not only for humanitarian purposes, but lifting the travel ban right now, even though their country is closed because of the pandemic, will show a very clear sign to North Korea that the United States is willing to engage with them again. And it's a very positive step towards peace that will do absolutely no damage, because we can't go there right now anyways. And once the borders do open, will allow humanitarian workers and humanitarian assistance to go in immediately. So that's why it is so important to lift this travel ban right now.
Yes, thank you so much, Joy, for that perspective. That's really important. I want to share a couple of comments in the chat that came just to the panelists. So Simon Cockrell, who runs a company in the tourism field, and has taken a tourist to North Korea, writes that estimated numbers of Americans visiting North Korea as tourists in the few years prior to the ban will be something like 1,000 per year at most. And this is separate from the humanitarian efforts, family reunions, and so on. And that number would account for about 20% of all Western tourists. And Young J. Lee writes, over 220 American people travel and die in Mexico every year. DPRK is not more dangerous than Mexico or other countries. And let's see. I want to kind of turn the discussion around a little bit to the separated families issue. There's so much, it's such a heartbreaking issue. My own father is a separated family member. And so I wanted to ask Chun if he could talk a little bit about what kind of efforts had been made in the past to reunite separated families, and what is the travel ban doing to the morale of Korean American separated families, both those who are elderly and direct family members, and those who, like me, are the sons and daughters of family members who are separated. Chun? You are muted, please unmute.
Okay, since the US and North Korea does not have diplomatic relations, it's somewhat hard to find the separate families in North Korea. It has to go through DPRK UN Mission Office and file the request. And it goes to North Korea, Pyongyang. And then they will try to find the person that being asked. But the problem is the process is not that fast. And also since after war, the families has been dispersed to different places. They may sometimes they do not have any clear record of what the person being to be found. So the thing is, although the current situation is that there is no U.S. involvement finding the separated family in North Korea. It has to be individual US citizens applying for the application to UN mission office. And then that's the process. So therefore, I wish, as stated in the agreed framework, at least US and DPLK established kind of a relationship office in Pyongyang and Washington, D.C., so that this kind of a request can go through the official channels, not individually applying for applications. So that's what I'm hoping for. And this travel ban impact just like me. I know where my families are, but I cannot go to see them. And like I said, one of my cousin has a lung cancer, and the other one has TB. So, you know, one time I supplied a medicine for TB, but I couldn't do it anymore because of this travel ban.
Thank you, Chun. That really is quite heartbreaking that you can't even send medicines to your family members who need them. Clearly, something has to really be changed. So this is another question for Chun. It's coming from another anonymous attendee who asks, what is the one thing that you will do when you are able to enter North Korea again?
Well, see my family, and I would like to travel with the families in North Korea again. That was a fabulous time I had because, you know, confined in a minivan and then staying at a hotel, and there are a lot of things that we can discuss on the family matter and how they live. They want to know how we live in the USA. So this is human to human contact and kind of eliminating the differences or misunderstanding from both sides. So since I retired, if the travel ban is lifted, I like to be tour guide. Whoever wants to go, I will go with them.
That's excellent, Chun. That happens, I'll be first on your list. Definitely would love to go to North Korea with you. This is a question for Ki and Joy. You know, both of you, you're unable to freely travel to North Korea to do your work there. How are you sustaining your humanitarian efforts, preparing for the day when you can go back? Ki?
So this is how I do it. Get involved with these advocacy type of events. I actually spent time through my academic interests to research on the impact of the sanctions, and we actually published our results. You know, and according to our estimates, up to 4,000 people could have died as a result of the sanctions delays and funding cuts. And we use this to, you know, show it to the senders of the sanctions and said, you said these are not designed to harm ordinary people of North Korea or hinder humanitarian work, but it is. What are you going to do about it? So there are a lot of things that we can do.
Thank you, Ki. Joy?
Ignis community is still very much, to a limited degree, but still very much actively engaging in humanitarian work in North Korea. We've been able to continue through, believe it or not, Chinese citizens who have been stuck in North Korea due to the border closing. We've been able to use them as a liaison to continue to get some resources inside North Korea to provide basic food and medicine in the country. Last year, even despite the pandemic, we did have one medical shipment that did arrive in Pyongyang. We have a second shipment that is actually in storage here in South Korea, ready to go as soon as the borders lift. And so we are still actively engaging. This past winter, we also had a ice feet challenge where we raised funds for shoe donations for children, especially during the bitter winter months where it gets sometimes down to negative 30 degrees Celsius in North Korea. So we are actively doing what we can despite the many limitations. So please continue to support organizations like ours who are trying to engage in humanitarian work. Of course, we are waiting, especially for the borders to lift, for more assistance to go in. And we are also hoping that not only our team members be able to go in with special validation passports, but the travel ban be lifted so that barrier will be removed.
Thank you, Joy. We are going to wrap up the Q&A, but I want to give our three panelists a chance to make one last remark. Okay. So one last word, and we'll start with Chun and then go to Ki and end with Joy. Chun?
My last one word is please lift the ban.
Thank you. Joy?
I think what we need to remember is that North Koreans are people just like you and me. They didn't choose to be born in their nation. We don't choose where we're born, but we have all the same value as people. And we have an opportunity today to help the people in North Korea to work towards a more peaceful future. And the best way to do that right now is to lift this ban so that as soon as the borders do lift, we can go in and we can start engaging at a humanitarian level, at other levels, in reaching the people of North Korea.
Thank you. Ki?
Yeah, I'll just wrap up and say that there is a sense of urgency to this issue. This is not something that we're going to let things work itself out over time because people's lives are at stake. We've been divided over 70 years. People who have experienced a division of families are literally dying daily. So we must fix this issue and lift the travel ban as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ki, and thank you, Joy and Chun, all three of our panelists, for their sharing their experiences and their insights. It was moving and enlightening. Very clearly, we do need to lift the ban. And so I just want to reiterate what we can do as individuals to add our support to the call for lifting the ban to travel to North Korea. You can sign our petition that asking the State Department to lift the travel ban. That petition is on our website. You can sign up to receive our campaign updates and alerts, and you can contact us to volunteer to join our campaign. You can also sign up and join this year's Korea Peace Advocacy Week, which will be the week of July 12th through 16th. There we have a sign-up link, and please join today. The sign-up deadline actually is tomorrow. Everybody who attended the webinar today will receive an email tomorrow with links to all of these action items. Also, if you want to educate yourself just a little bit more on this travel ban, on Korea peace issues, and on why the war, the ongoing more than 70 years old war between the United States and North Korea needs to end, please read the Path to Peace report. A link to that will also be sent to you in that email. And that's it, everybody. Again, lift for peace. Let individuals freely travel. Let us visit and live and work in North Korea. Visit our separated family members. Visit our patients and colleagues. Work with people at a people-to-people level for peace. On behalf of the Korea Partnership and the Lift for Peace campaign, thank you and good night.